Evening, all. It's Ryan Lambert from 1987's The Monster Squad, where I killed three vampires, a mummy, and a werewolf. I'm welcoming my fellow monster slayers to Brian P. Easton's autobiography of a werewolf hunter series and a whiskey with the werewolf hunter.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. I'm Brian Easton, the author of the autobiography of a werewolf hunter series, and behind me is the Werewolf Bar. Special thanks to Ryan Lambert of the Monster Squad for getting us up and running tonight. Appreciate that. Well, this evening on our Creature of the Night segment, we're not only going to be tasting some exceptional rye, but we're also going to be doing so out of a massively cool glass. Now, what I mean by that is that this tumbler right here is one of a set of four that was given to me by a friend at an early Christmas party the other night. And it was a very thoughtful gift, one that I had never seen before, because if I had, I assure you I would have bought it for the Werewolf Bar. And let me show you what I mean. In the bottom of this glass, I don't know if you can see that or not, but it's got a werewolf face or a wolf's head deeply embossed into the bottom of the glass. Kind of makes me want to go out and stamp werewolf cookies this time of year. So it goes without saying that this drinkware is now being adopted as the official drinkware of the Werewolf Bar and Whiskey with a Werewolf Hunter. And filling the glass is the rye that I was talking about, which was also a gift. And as you can see, it was well received. There's just a little bit left in it that I saved for this evening. My little brother gave it to me over Thanksgiving, and I told him that I would be sure to feature it on the December episode of Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. And so this is a High West double rye. And it's actually a blend of two different ryes. So it's got more spice to it than your average bear. But we're going to go ahead and sample some more of this evening. To your health. See, I just love that. It's got a very nice clove meets pepper kind of a taste to it. It goes smooth going down and just kind of sweetens up towards the end. So special thanks to Bradley and his wife Amber for getting this to me, and for Sika for making a gift of the great glasses. Well, just the other day, I came across a very cool app called Dream by Wombo. Now, this app, what it does is it takes an artificial intelligence and it creates artwork based on your input, on the criteria that you kind of enter as text in the app. And the images that it generates range from, I would say, kind of a pseudo-realistic to surreal to out and out nightmare fuel. This thing is really cool, and I became fascinated with it pretty quick. And I started experimenting with different takes on werewolves, of course. And what I found out was that this AI is a fantastic artist when it comes to scenery, landscapes, backdrops, things that are sort of broad in nature. But where it falls short is with figures, be they human, animal, or monsters. And for example, the werewolves came out as these kind of amorphous blobs of hair without much shape or definition. Every once in a while, you might get something that vaguely resembles a werewolf, but for the most part, it doesn't render figures very well at all. So what I started doing was entering scenery descriptions from my book series. So I have images rendered from all 4 books in the series. And so I thought I'd share them with you tonight as a sort of a virtual flip book, if you will. So have a look at what AI can do to illustrate the Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter series. Well, we had a lot of fun doing that, I can tell you, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. If you have a scene in mind that I didn't cover there, just let me know in the comments section, and I'll do my best to see what I can come up with in this app and share it with you. Well, I've had enough feedback on my narration of my unpublished manuscripts to go ahead and continue with part two of Spirits in the Silence, which is the title of the first story in the first unpublished manuscript sequel called Dark Rivers Run. Now, I think I told you I have about 6 of these things, 5 or 6 unpublished manuscripts. So this is the first story from the first one. And let me warn you again that I am not an accomplished narrator. The story itself is raw and unedited, and I might add from the late 1990s, or mid 1990s, I should say. So it's also not canon because I drew a lot of the things that are in my published works from my manuscripts. So if you can forgive a little word fumbling, some predictability, and maybe a dose of cringeworthy cliche, maybe you'll enjoy the second part of Spirits in the Silence.
Logan, Dark Rivers Run, Spirits in the Silence, Part 2. You know, 3 months ago, I'd have called the county mental ward to come and get you. But as it is, I don't see that I've got much of a choice but to hear you out for now, he said, begrudgingly. Fair enough, I agreed. But I'm wondering just why you would believe me. You know, something about Vargo that scared you. A long time before I showed up is my guess. What is it? He was through stalling. He removed his hat and sat it out in front of him, running his fingers along the brim as he spoke. Carl was making an evening patrol the 3rd of last June. He drove up the old logging road to Bison Hill, looking for kids, parking and making out, whatnot. But instead he found Sam. I got the call as I was headed home. Carl told me where he was and that he'd found Sam and that he was dead, and that was all. He didn't sound upset or anything. A bit strange, I thought, in the light of how he had died, but then again, you'd need to know Carl. The man wouldn't get excited if his drawers were on fire. When I drove up to meet him, Carl had his pump gun in hand, standing in front of the cruiser and with its spotlight on the body. I never expected the mess that I saw. There he was, Samuel, his skin chalky gray, his eyes almost bulged out of his skull, covered in dried blood. I mean, it was everywhere. There were flies swarming all over him. I had to cover my mouth. It was obvious where all the blood had come from. His throat was wide open. I mean, it looked like someone had taken a pair of those garden claws and pulled it apart with one in each hand. And Carl points to some shell casings and Sam's .308 bolt action. The rifle had been twisted into scrap metal. Both of us were at a loss for a good explanation as to how that happened, so we just started looking for tire tracks, footprints, just anything we could find. I mean, Sam lived just up that road. The only thing that we found was a wolf print in some loose dirt. A wolf print that was about twice the size of my hand. And he held up a meaty paw. It wasn't a small hand. And you didn't report it, I guessed correctly. If I'd have done that, called the Mounties like I should have, Skilwalk would have been screwed. Remember all the killings in Saskatchewan and Alberta 10 years ago? All the press that got, the Saskatchewan slasher and all? You got to understand something about this town. Skiing is all we've got. For a few months out of the year, we're like a boom town. We depend on the tourists. Who wants to ski where something like that's happened? So you buried the whole thing, I deduced once again. Right along with Samuel, he said. He didn't have any family, no friends to speak of. Nobody asked questions. We had a little closed casket funeral for him. Told the mortician he'd gotten drunk, fell on a crosscut saw. We spread the heart attack story you heard. No one doubted it. No one really cared, not for a minute. Nice and tidy, eh? So tell me something. What did you plan to do about the real cause of his death? Big's eyebrows flinched, then relaxed. Ordinarily, I'm not a superstitious man. I've always believed that good and evil began and ended in the hearts of people. But you were right when you said I've been scared ever since the day we found him. A wolf? I can buy that. There's plenty of them about. Give me enough time and I might even be able to believe in a wolf with paws that big. But I never heard of any, or creature at all for that matter, that could mangle a piece of steel into a pretzel like that. The best route I could think of was just to forget that it ever happened. I figured I'd just let it be. Didn't know what else to do, really. Oh, I thought about coming out with the truth later on, but by then I had no body and no evidence. If Biggs had turned the case over to the RCMP, I might have wound up here anyway, at government expense. As it was, my client was already dead, and I doubted the sheriff was going to make it worth my while. Life is just one kick in the nuts after another, ain't it? I leaned back in my chair and scratched my chin. You know it's going to happen again, if it's not taken care of, I warned them. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but sooner or later it'll be back. Killing Vargo wasn't supposed to attract any attention, since he was a loner, and the wolf who probably did him probably counted on you doing just exactly what you did. The Saskatchewan slasher was a big deal, you're right about that. Killed lots of people, scared lots more, but eventually got himself killed because of it. This one's not stupid enough to be that bold. You're not saying that the slasher was... I'm saying werewolves are not what you think they are. The slightly fuzzy Lon Chaney Jr. types? They're murdering bastards, and they're the definition of evil. Some are worse than others, but this one's too smart to let it be, as you put it. Vargo's body wasn't eaten in places, gnawed on at all. He shook his head with a steadfast no. Then it must have been personal. How do you figure that? He challenged. They eat human flesh. It's their mainstay. The only time you ever heard of a wolf going straight for the throat without at least taking a snack is because of a grudge. No fucking around. Straight out kill. He sat up straight with his elbows on the desk. How do you know all this stuff? Because I've been doing the same thing since I was old enough to know better. He shook his head and got up from his chair. He patted down his pockets. And I was going to give up smoking, too. I tossed him some matches after he retrieved a nearly empty cigarette pack. The letter you got said something about money, didn't it? Yeah, I said. I collect a fee most usually. Well, I bought your breakfast, he reminded me. Don't sweat it. If we find Sam's money buried in a mason jar somewhere, great. But it's always been a personal thing for me, too. If you could put me up somewhere and take care of my expenses, I'd be obliged. I think I can handle that. The sheriff's radio called out again. Deputies White Crow and DuPont had finished at the accident scene, and in the midst of several 10 codes being rattled off, I could have swore I heard the name Lucas mentioned. Biggs gave them the Big 10-4 back as I took a drink on my Java. Did they say Lucas? I asked. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. Yeah, so? He asked sharply. Nothing, I reassured him. I've just heard some things is all. The town likes to talk, he said. So what's with this Lucas clan anyway? Just a backwoods family who don't amount to much more than white trash. White trash, eh? That's all? Stay out of it, James. It's got nothing to do with you. I held up my hands in apology. Definitely a tender subject around here. Must be quite a bunch to have the sheriff's department tucking their tails. In a town as small as Skowak, it's not hard to recognize a closet full of skeletons when you see one. I was about to thank him for breakfast and then sit back down when the door opened and a lawman, number 3, stepped in, Carl DuPont. He was taller than I'd pictured, and with a chiseled face, narrow eyes that gave him something of a Clint Eastwood look, like he'd just as soon eat broken glass as string beans. He wore a solemn expression as our eyes met. They were the eyes of a man not easily impressed with life, and though devoid of anything resembling the beast, there was something dark there. Biggs grabbed his hat off the table and stood up. Carl, this is Logan James. He's going to be in town a few days. I was just getting ready to take him up to the lodge. DuPont barely acknowledged the introduction. "Stay here and mind the store till I get back," he told him. "I'll talk to you about the fender bender later." I walked outside with the sheriff. "Levi's fixing my truck. Said he'd be done around noon." Biggs looked at his watch. "Well, I can take you out and have Levi drop it off when he's done if you want. You look like you could sleep." It was true. I hadn't slept the night before, and I'd need some shut-eye to tackle this. "Sounds like a plan," I accepted. Ordinarily, the ski lodge didn't open until late October, but Biggs made the arrangements from his Jeep radio while I grabbed a bag from the Silverado and headed toward the lodge. The bungalow was just what I needed. It was secluded and quiet. I was still in the need of a good cleaning before the skiers arrived, but no one would have anticipated a guest in August. It was still in need of a good cleaning before the skiers arrived, but no one could have anticipated a guest in August. There was a big picture window that stared out into the mountains, and I stood watching it. The rolling mountainsides, they were begging for a blanket of snow. I changed into some sweatpants, sprawled out on the overstuffed sofa with a bottle of Lord Calvert I kept in my bag. I'd not been so relaxed since I'd left Manitoba, and that seemed more like months than weeks ago. I sipped at the warm ripples of whiskey and concentrated on this wolf, going point by point over what I knew. The 308 brass meant Samuel had seen it coming, which meant he hadn't tried to surprise him. It wanted to be seen. Otherwise, he would never got off a round. Usually only high or noble wolven are so brash. No other marks on the body but the death wound. It wanted Sam dead, and that was the end of it. But still, it just couldn't resist wrenching the rifle into junk. Nothing of him was eaten, which made this one-shot kill something personal. I believed the werewolf to have had a personal grievance against Vargo, and to have killed him for no other reason. It just did its business and left. If I was right about this, I had a smooth customer on my hands, and if not, it wouldn't be the first time. I figured I'd take a hike up Bison Hill the next day, mostly to scout the scenery, but stumbling across the money in the mattress wouldn't have hurt my feelings either. I was half asleep when I heard my truck roll up the drive. Through a partially drawn curtain, I watched a sheriff's cruiser following the Silverado, with Levi behind the wheel. I didn't hear the annoying rattling sound anymore. Levi tucked the keys under the visor, then hopped in the car with DuPont. The deputy gave a long, hard stare at the cabin as he pulled away. I capped the Lord Calvert and wandered back to the bedroom. Lord, I was tired. It wasn't quite dawn when I finally awoke. I'd slept most of the day before, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd done that. The cabin was cold from the night's temperature drop, and so I kindled a small fire from last season's wood supply, stacked neatly on the fireplace's hearth. I had a wad of Red Man for breakfast, grabbed a shower while the sun crept into place. There was still some coffee in the pantry, so I fixed a pot and then sat down with it at a big dinner table that overlooked the undusted slopes. I'd always enjoyed the silence of morning in the mountains, and I'd sat basking in that great fresh quietness. I remembered Michael used to say, "If you listen hard enough, you can hear through the silence and hear what the spirits are saying to one another. If you're wise, you can learn a lot from their conversations, but don't forget you're just a man, and the spirits speak of powerful things." I used to sit for hours when I was a boy, trying so hard to listen through the silence that the blood rushing through my head became as deafening as an ocean surf. I never did hear any spirits talking, but I did hone my hearing to that of a cat, which was what Michael had intended all along. Training in the sacred way of the Redosnan Warrior Society wasn't all mental and physical hell. Some of it had been as peaceful as the Spirit River. And the thought occurred to me that I should be with Michael now, like a child who returns home after losing his inheritance. He was all that was left to me in life, and I was all that he had, too. I knew one day he wouldn't be around anymore, and then I would be completely alone, but the idea seemed ridiculous that Michael Winterfox could die. I knew better than that. Even the wizened old warrior shaman that he was still a man, and men die. A fragment of a conversation we had once came back to me. He told me, "Death always beats us, Sylvester. Sometimes, even if we just let it." When it's all boiled down to moonshine, death is king. Maybe it was the whole train of thought, or maybe it was because I finally understood what he meant by that, but it disturbed me. He was saying that the will to live could be given up, and by doing that, you let death win without a fight. It just takes over. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was almost 9 o'clock before I arrived back inside city limits. The little town was coming into focus in the cold light of day and the events of the day before. DuPont's blue and white cruiser sat like a predator at the edge of town, waiting for a stray speeder as surely as a coyote waits for a mouse to jump. I braked slowly and pulled in alongside him. He watched me all the way in. His expressionless gaze didn't last long once I'd come to a stop. He just turned back to his radar gun as though he might be missing something. One doesn't have to be a genius to know when one isn't appreciated around here. To that, I said, "Tough shit." "Deputy DuPont," I said casually. "James," he returned without a second look. I could practically read his mind. He wanted me out of his town, and at that particular moment, out of his face. "How do I get to Bison Hill?" I asked. He pointed a finger vaguely somewhere to the northwest and said, "That way." Since it was obvious that I was going nowhere with deputy personality, I pulled away from him into the teeming metropolis itself, watching my speed, of course. I hadn't decided what I thought about Carl DuPont yet. I mean, it was apparent that he didn't appreciate my presence in his town, and that I could understand. But there was this little nagging in the pit of my stomach that told me DuPont had other reasons besides the obvious. It was quite a bit cooler than the day before, and I wore both .45s under a denim jacket, even though I wasn't officially sanctioned to carry weapons anymore. Force of habit and the overwhelming desire not to be killed kept me a lawbreaker. I found Biggs standing in front of the cop shop with a man I hadn't seen before. Something warned me, though, that I'd be seeing him again. One look at him, and I just knew he was part of the Lucas clan. He was right at 6'5", with an unkempt beard and a mane of tangled brown hair. His clothes were of the dirty Carhartt variety, and fingerless work gloves. And he was strapped, too. What looked to be an 1843 outlaw hung from his pistol belt around his waist. Most strikingly, Biggs paid no attention to it. I parked the truck in front of the general store in hopes of eavesdropping without being obvious. I sat in the cab and kept my face forward, my eyes closed. I concentrated and blotted out every sound, directing much of my overall sensory energy to my ears. Everything filtered through a net of deliberate concentration inside my head until I heard only the distinctive timbre of their voices. I told you, listening through the silence could work wonders. "I have to send it in, Kane. You know that. There isn't anything I can do about it," Biggs said in a kind of a plea. "If you send that accident report to Vancouver, it'll mean Damien's ass. That's right, isn't it?" Kane's tone was threatening. "He was drunk," the sheriff said. "The woman he hit is still in ICU at the Wells Hospital. He's lucky he didn't kill himself." "ICU hell. Damien was on a pea-shooting dirt bike. She was in a Buick. She's in bad shape. That's too sad. But Damien's not going to jail," he declared. "He might just get probation. That is, if she pulls through. And what if she don't?" I could hear the spittle splash between his teeth and Biggs' response, standing in silence. "This ain't open for discussion, Biggs. You understand me?" "Please try to understand my position here, Kane. This is my job." "Your job is to keep the peace. But if you send in that report, there won't be any peace. They try to take my brother away, I promise you. You don't know what good times are. You want to take that chance? You know I don't talk to hear my lips flap." There was a long golden stream of silence, and then, "I'll lose the papers," Biggs said, sheepishly. "There. You see, Biggsy, you can make a smart choice when you put your mind to it." I saw why Biggs was so jumpy when I mentioned the Lucas family before. They ran the town. I opened my eyes, and a wash of focused senses flushed back into their proper places. Kane patted Biggs on the back as he walked away, and in my direction. He took big plowboy steps, but they were graceful for a man of his size. Our eyes met as he walked by, and through his chiseled face I dove into his eyes, into the well of his soul, and I saw that it was thick and dark with the beast. I looked away so as not to draw attention to myself, and then I watched him trudge across the street. My .45s itched in their holsters. The silver wad cutters were begging me to use them. My hands became warm, and my fingers burned. There it was, a perfect shot, walking away from me. I could have scragged the wolf right then and there and been done with it, but only I knew the truth, and the last time I gunned down a werewolf without a badge in the company of a lawman, I got the big house. It took all I had, but I decided to wait, consoling myself with the fact that Kane Lucas wasn't going anywhere. Now I really needed to get to Bison Hill, try to come up with something that would convince the sheriff that Kane was more than he seemed, that he'd murdered Sam Vargo. A werewolf that packs heat, no less. What's the world coming to? I could see this thing turning nasty very quickly unless I got a second chance at the kind of prize target I just let waltz by. Then there was a moment of clarity. I was still acting like there were reports to sign and date. There was no paperwork here, no badge, and most of all, no money. To hell with these backwater flat feet. I'd do this for myself and bury him in the hills. Biggs was making tracks for my truck, twisting his handlebar mustache as he came. "You're up bright and early," he said through a plastic grin. "Been up before God this morning," I said. "Problem with one of the locals?" He shook his head in the style of a man who doesn't know how to lie. "No, no," he waved away. "Probably warning him about wearing that hog leg into town, huh?" "Yeah, you know how these mountain people are," he said as he shook his head and patted his hips. I didn't breathe the word Lucas. "I want to go up on Bison Hill, have a look around. How do I get there from here?" He gladly offered detailed directions on where they'd found Vargo's body and where the old man's shack was. He must have been anxious to get back inside his office and put that accident report through the shredder. The old logging road was slick and narrow as it wound around Bison Hill. A cool drizzle fell from overcast skies as I picked my way along it, repeating Biggs' instructions aloud to myself. I stopped just around a hairpin curve and packed Sounder into my thigh scabbard. I took a bite of chaw and headed up the road where they'd found the body. I saw the silhouette of the shack through the trees, and the hairs on my neck bristled. Instinctively, I ripped my Colts free and pivoted in all directions, because it's generally a bad indicator when my hairs bristle. There was only the plip-plop of raindrops in the trees, smell of wet pine. I stared off into the woods and the descending ravine to spy a battle-scarred blue spruce. The bark had been blasted away, and on closer inspection I found the bullet wounds. Barely noticeable to layman's eyes was a metal nugget embedded in the trunk. I extracted the misshapen lump with the help of my pocket knife and rolled between my fingers a .308 slug. There were several minuscule hairs clinging to the bullet's crimps. Sam had hit his killer, but the projectile was semi-jacketed lead, not silver, of course. I walked back to the road and stood where Sam had died. A deluge of ancient hatred came over me as I thought about Kane and how I'd let him walk away. I reaffirmed my passion for their deaths, and I strode through the gray streaks of rain to the little shanty. It was a small, little cabin, not unlike Michael's. It was a barely accommodating hovel. A crude wood-burning stove, a table with 3 legs, a rusted folding chair. It was a small and barely accommodating hovel. A crude wood-burning stove, a table with 3 legs, and a rusted folding chair. Flimsy stained mattress made up the furnishings. There was just enough room inside to sleep, eat, and maybe clean a rifle. An old pad of yellowed paper and a stub of a pencil lay beneath a molded coffee cup on the table. It was the same paper he'd used to write me. I moved to investigate the prehistoric mattress, and as I bent down I could feel the burn of a stare on the back of my neck. And I heard the voice say, "Look at here, Jesse. We caught us a thief." I cautiously plucked a .45 from my rig and turned around slowly, keeping the pistol obscured with my body, so that now as I faced them, it was behind my back. The Lucas girl and presumably one of her brothers stood at the entrance to the hut. I was looking down the bore of his .50 caliber buffalo rifle. It was held by a kid wearing a worn-out ball cap. There was a paunch of snuff in his bottom lip, and he wore tattered olive-drab trousers and a dirty white long john shirt with an unbuttoned quilted flannel over it. He was maybe 17. Looked like he was trying his best to grow facial hair. It was hard to believe that the gorgeous wildcat reclined against the door jamb came from the same gene pool. She was breathtaking in a wicked sort of way, twisting a lock of her golden hair around her forefinger and eyeballing me curiously. There was a pinkish cast to the boy's hand, suggesting they'd been recently covered with blood. His eyes were shallow, mean-spirited, but I saw no beast. For the few seconds we wordlessly faced one another, I thought I might be able to get this punk to lead me to Cain, if I played my cards right. If I didn't, I could get him to redecorate the walls with my guts. "You find anything you like, thief?" he asked. "I'm not a thief," I said calmly. Then Jesse chimed in. "Make him put his hands out where we can see them." "Do it," he said, flexing the rifle at me. I dropped the .45 behind me and showed them my hands. "See, Saul, I told you he had a gun." Cain, Jezebel, Saul, their parents must be good Bible-reading folks. "Shut up, bitch, I ain't blind," he snapped back. "Okay, what say we all put our guns down? I get a little nervous on the other end of a cannon." "You got good reason to be nervous. You know who I am? I'm a Lucas, and so's she. You're trespassing on our land." "Sorry, I was just taking a walk. My truck's just down the road." "I saw it. Pick up his pistol, Jesse, and toss that scattergun over by the stove," he ordered. Jesse did as she was told. Saul moved in closer. She brushed behind me and peeled sounder from its sheath. I smelled the slightest hint of honeysuckle in her hair. She examined the Colt. "It's an old .45 automatic, Saul." Saul snickered. "I can outshoot either one of you with it," I challenged. Saul gave an amused chuckle while Jesse looked me square in the eyes. No beast there either. "Nice try, motherfucker," Saul answered back. "I can put the entire clip through the same hole at 50 yards. Is that so?" I was counting on his juvenile ego. Take it from me, young men will do the stupidest things just to prove themselves. "You're just trying to get your gun back is all." "Show him you're better, Saul." Pressure from Sis was appreciated. "God damn it, bitch, shut the fuck up. I got nothing to prove to this squatter." "I'll make a little bet with you. Saul, is it? If you win, you can keep the shotgun and the Colt. Do with what you want to me. But if I win, you let me be on my way. Fair enough?" He smirked. "I can do what I want with you anyway." I spit a stream of tobacco juice between my boots and changed my tone of voice. "You don't have a hair on your ass, do you? I'm calling you out, boy. You yella?" Jesse was backed up next to him. He stared at the side of his head. He was getting angry. Foolishness was sure to follow. I grew up in mountains bigger than these, and I know a thing or two about pushing buttons on this breed of people. Saul shifted his weight from one foot to another, nervously. Then he handed the .50 caliber to Jesse. He drew a cap and ball revolver from his backside and holstered it down the front of his pants. He took my .45 from Jesse, chambered around, and dropped the magazine out. "If he even blinks, blow him away." Jesse behind the trigger made me more nervous than Saul. He closed the distance between us and stuffed my heater into my jeans. I could have grabbed him and the buffalo rifle. Could have blown holes right through the both of us, so I played it out. He backed away from me and settled into a gunfighter stance. "Whenever you get the gumption," he said. "What's to keep your partner there from blasting me to kingdom come?" Saul shrugged and spit his own black juice on the floor. "I don't know," he replied with an impish grin. "What other choice you got?" Jessie looked down at the full magazine at her feet. then bolted her head up. Silver. He's got Silver! While she was yelling, I was slapping leather. Her momentary distraction with my Lone Ranger specials provided the break I was waiting for. Logically, I should have shot for Jessie. She was the one with the bigger weapon, but I skinned the other Colt and nailed Saul in the throat with the dum-dum. Blood and flesh sprayed out behind him as he crumpled into a heap. He hadn't even cleared leather. I made a dive to one side and reached for the second Colt, still waiting behind my jacket. I remember palming the grip and the room flooding with the bellow of a discharging buffalo gun. There was a warmth on the side of my face, a weakness in my legs, and then the world faded to black. Smoke. I could smell smoke, feel the heat of a fire against my legs. I couldn't move. It was like I was bound up. My head was fuzzy. Everything was blurred. I wasn't alarmed. I was unnaturally relaxed. I was drugged. I knew it was night, that I was outdoors. There was coldness, too, and the frosty silence of the firs, the silence of the mountains. I drifted somewhere between shadow and substance, the twilight zone. Yeah, it was what this was like. And listening to the glorious echo of the silence. And as I did, I heard faint noises like voices in a whisper. Then I heard more keenly. They were noble voices, engaged in some conversation. Are these spirits? I held my own breath. They were as calm as the brush of the wind, and as lucid as a virgin stream. Will he live? These voices, they speak in the tongue of the Northern Cheyenne, yet I understood every word. That is for him to decide. Him. The great mystery will take him if he does not resist. He is of ancient warrior's blood and has proven his courage. He will be welcomed into the embrace of his elders. And if he resists, if he opposes the great mystery's will, yes, what for him then? If he fights with the strength he has fought with before, he will live. Yes, but he is weary with his life. Living is always the hardest plight of a warrior. I think he will not resist, but is ready to finish his life. Perhaps, but see the fire there in his belly? It has not been quenched in darker days than these. The coals burn hot, but only he can decide if they are hot enough. His hatred burns strong for the wolf. Is hatred enough to live on? There was a pause. No. I felt as though I were crying out to the spirits without knowing if I was being heard. Hatred is all I have left, I cried. The beast has taken everything I love and has left me only with this. I'm not ready to die. I have to kill them. I don't know if they were actual audible words or if they were only thoughts. The voices faded into the returning silence of summit and canyon, and I was engulfed in blackness once again.
We'll probably finish up Spirits in the Silence next month. But that's all the time we've got for tonight. So leave any comments or questions down in the comment section. Hit the subscribe button if it won't break your heart. And thanks for joining me at the Werewolf Bar this evening. Merry Christmas to you. Happy Hanukkah. Happy holidays. And I'll see you back here next year. And until then, happy hunting and mind the moon.
Hope you're all in the goddamn club.